I. All right. Let's see. Where was I? Page 24. Goldstein, bellowed the boy as the door closed on him. But what most struck Winston was the look of helpless fright on the woman's grayish face. Back in the flat, he stepped quickly past the telescreen and sat down at the table again, still rubbing his neck. The music from the telescreen had stopped. Instead, a clipped military voice was reading out, with a sort of brutal relish, a description of the armaments of the new floating fortress, which had just been anchored between Iceland and the Faroe Islands. With those children, he thought, that wretched woman must lead a life of terror. Another year, 2 years, and they would be watching her night and day for symptoms of unorthodoxy. Nearly all children nowadays were horrible. What was worse of all was that by means of such organization as the spies, they were systematically turned into ungovernable little savages. And yet this produced in them no tendency whatever to rebel against the discipline of the party. On the contrary, they adored the party and everything connected with it. The songs, the processions, the banners, the hiking, the drilling with dummy rifles, the yelling of slogans, the worship of Big Brother. It was all sort of a glorious game to them. All their ferocity was turned outwards against the enemies of the state, against foreigners, traitors, saboteurs, thought criminals. It was almost normal for people over 30 to be frightened of their own children, and with good reason, for hardly a week passed in which the Times did not carry a paragraph describing how some eavesdropping little sneak, child hero was the phrase generally used, had overheard some compromising remark and denounced his parents to the thought police. The sting of the catapult bullet had worn off. He picked up his pen. Are you reading with me?
Yeah,
right here.
right here.
He picked up his pen half-heartedly, wondering whether he could find something more to write in the diary. Suddenly, he began thinking of O'Brien again.
It's O'Brien.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Years ago? How long was it? 7 years?
It must be. He had dreamed that he was walking through a pitch-dark room, and someone sitting to one side of him had said as he passed, "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness." It was said very quietly, almost casually, a statement, not a command. He had walked down without pausing. Oh, interesting.
He had walked down without pausing. What was curious? Wait.
What was curious was that at the time, in the dream,
the words had not made much impression on him.
It was only later and by degrees that they had seemed to take significance. He could not now remember whether it was before or after having the dream that he had seen O'Brien for the first time. Nor could he remember when he had first identified the voice as O'Brien's. But at any don't. But at any rate, the identification existed. It was O'Brien who had spoken to him out of the dark.
Can we do paragraphs like you do one paragraph?
No, we're not doing that because I don't have time. And I read full speed. And no, stop. Alright. Let's see. He could have, okay, so wait, what happened in this chapter? 7 years. Dreamed as a, okay. So it was some kind of dream this guy had. Okay, that's cool. Winston had never been able to feel sure. Even after this morning's flash of the eyes, it was impossible to be sure whether O'Brien was a friend or an enemy. Nor did it even seem to matter greatly. There was a link of understanding between them more important than affection or partisanship. Okay. "We shall meet in a place where there is no darkness," he had said. Winston did not know what it meant, only that in some way or another it would come true. The voice from the telescreen paused. A trumpet call, clear and beautiful, floated into the stagnant air. The voice continued raspingly. Attention, please. A news flash has this moment arrived from the Malabar front. Our forces in South India have won a glorious victory. I am authorized to say that the action we are now reporting may well bring the war within measurable distance of its end. Here's the news flash. Bad news coming, thought Winston, and sure enough, following a gory description of the annihilation of a Eurasian army, with stupendous figures of killed and prisoners, came the announcement that as from the next week, the chocolate ration would be reduced from 30 grams to 20. Hold up. Cool. Alright, bro, don't distract me, bro. You gotta get out of here, bro. I'm serious. Let's see. Winston belched again. Let's see. Bad news coming, thought Winston, and sure enough, following on a gory description of the annihilation of the Eurasian army, with stupendous figures of killed and prisoners, came the announcement that, as from next week, the chocolate ration would be reduced from 30 grams to 20. Damn. Winston belched again. The gin was wearing off, leaving a defeated feeling. The telescreen, perhaps to celebrate the victory, perhaps to drown in the memory of the lost chocolate, crushed into Oceana tis for thee. You were supposed to stand at attention. However, in his present position, he was invisible. Oceana tis for thee gave way to lighter music. Winston walked over to the window, keeping his back to the telescreen. The day was still cold and clear. Somewhere far away, a rocket bomb exploded with a dull, reverberating roar. About 20 or 30 of them a week were falling on London at present. I don't know what that means, bruh. What's going on here? Okay. We'll read the spark notes after this. Winston belched again. The gin was wearing off. Okay, whatever. You were supposed to stand in attention or okay. Oceana tis for thee gave way to lighter music. Winston walked over to the window. Okay, we already read this part. Down in the street, the wind flapped the torn poster to and fro, and the word Ingsoc fitfully appeared and vanished. Ingsoc, the sacred principles of Ingsoc. Newspeak, doublethink, the mutability of the past. He felt as though he were wandering in the forests of the sea bottom, lost in a monstrous world where he himself was the monster. He was alone. The past was dead. The future was unimaginable. What certainty had he that a single human creature now living was on his side? And what way of knowing that the dominion of the party would not endure forever? Like an answer, the three slogans on the white face of ministry came back to him. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Okay, so this is a little confusing, but it's cool. It's pretty chill. He took a 25-cent piece out of his pocket. There too, in tiny clear lettering, the same slogans were inscribed. And on the other face of the coin, the head of Big Brother. Even from the coin, the eyes pursued you. On coins, on stamps, on the covers of books, on banners, on posters, and on the wrapping of a cigarette packet, everywhere. Big Brother. Always the eyes watching you and the voice enveloping you. Asleep or awake, working or eating, indoors or out of doors, in the bed or in bed, no escape. Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters inside your skull. That's very interesting. The sun had shifted round, and the myriad windows of the Ministry of Truth, with the light no longer shining on them, looked grim as loopholes of a fortress. His heart quailed before the enormous pyramidal shape. It was too strong. It could not be stormed. 1,000 rocket bombs would not batter it down. He wondered again for whom he was writing the diary, for the future, for the past, for an age that might be imaginary. And in front of him there lay not death but annihilation. The diary would be reduced to ashes and himself to vapor. Only the thought police would read what he had written before they wiped it out of existence and out of memory. How could you make an appeal for the future when not a trace of you, not even an anonymous word scribbled on a piece of paper, could physically survive? The telescreen struck 14. He must leave in 10 minutes. He had to be back at work by 14:30. 14:30. So wait, what time is that? 2:30 p.m. I guess so. Curiously, the chiming of the hour seemed to have put new heart into him. He was a lonely ghost uttering a truth that nobody would ever hear. But so long as he uttered it, in some obscure way, the continuity was not broken. It was not by making yourself heard, but by staying sane that you carried on the human heritage. He went back to the table, dipped his pen, and wrote. To the future or to the past, to a time when thought is free, when men are different from one another and do not live alone, to a time when truth exists and what is done cannot be undone, from the age of uniformity, from the age of solitude, from the age of Big Brother, from the age of doublethink, greetings. He was already dead, he reflected. It seemed to him that it was only now, when he had begun to be able to formulate his thoughts, that he had taken the decisive step. The consequences of every act are included in the act itself. He wrote, thought crimes does not entail death. Thought crime is death. That is crazy. So bro knows he's cooked. Now that he had recognized himself as a dead man, it became important to stay alive as long as possible. 2 fingers of his right hand were ink stained. It was exactly this kind of detail that might betray you. Some nosing zealot in the ministry, a woman probably. That's crazy. That's so sexist. A woman probably, someone like the little sandy-haired woman or the dark-haired girl from the fiction department, might start wondering why he had been writing during the lunch interval, why he had used an old-fashioned pen, what he had been writing, and then drop a hint in the appropriate quarter. He went to the bathroom and carefully scrubbed the ink away with a gritty, dark brown soap which rasped her skin like sandpaper and was therefore well adapted for this purpose. Goodness gracious, bro. Goodness gracious. He put the diary away in the drawer. It was quite useless to think of hiding it, but he could at least make sure whether or not its existence had been discovered. A hair laid across the page ends was too obvious. With the tip of his finger, he picked up an identifiable grain of whitish dust and deposited it on the corner of the cover, where it was bound to be shaken off if the book was moved. Okay, I mean, this guy's mad smart. This reminds me of Death Note, bruh. Kinda cool, kinda cool. I'm a fatty. Yeah. Fue. Alright, chapter 3. Winston was dreaming of his mother. He must, he thought, had been 10 or 11 years old when his mother had disappeared. She was a tall, statuesque, either silent woman with slow movements and magnificent fair hair. His father he remembered more vaguely as dark and thin, dressed always in neat dark clothes. Winston remembered especially the very thin soles of his father's shoes, and wearing spectacles, so glasses. The 2 of them must evidently have been swallowed up in one of the first great purges of the 50s. At that moment, his mother was sitting in some place deep down beneath him, with his younger sister. Okay, that's interesting. With his younger sister in her arms. He did not remember his sister at all, except as a tiny, feeble baby, always silent with large, watchful eyes. Dude, this guy was cooked, man. Both of them were looking up at him. They were down in some subterranean place, the bottom of a well, for instance, or a very deep grave. But it was a place which, already far below him, was itself moving downwards. Interesting. So what kind of dream is this? They were in the saloon of a sinking ship, looking up at him through the darkening water. There was still air in the saloon. They could still see him and he them, but all the while they were sinking down into the green waters, which in another moment must hide them from sight forever. He was out in light and air while they were being sucked down to death, and they were down there because he was up here. He knew it, and they knew it, and he could see the knowledge in their faces. There was no reproach either in their faces or in their hearts, or the knowledge that they must die in order that he might remain alive, and that this was part of the unavoidable order of things. He could not remember what had happened, but he knew in his dream that in some way the lives of his mother and his sister had been sacrificed to his own. It was one of those dreams which, while retaining the characteristic dream scenery, are a continuation of one's intellectual life, and in which one becomes aware of facts and ideals which still seem new and valuable after one is awake. The thing that now suddenly struck Winston was that his mother's death, nearly 30 years ago, had been tragic and sorrowful in a way that was no longer possible. Tragedy, he perceived, belonging to the ancient time, to a time when there were still privacy, love, and friendship, and when the members of a family stood by one another without needing to know the reason. His mother's memory tore at his heart because she had died loving him, and when he was too young and selfish to love her in return, and because somehow he did not remember how she had sacrificed herself to a conception of loyalty that was private and unalterable. Such things, he saw, could not happen today. Today there were fear, hatred. What's up, Garf? I was getting bored, so I was getting a little bored. That's it. Such things he saw could not happen today. Today there were fear, hatred, and no dignity, emotion, or deeper complex sorrows. All this, all this, where was that? All this he seemed to see in the large eyes of his mother and his sister, looking up at him through the greens, through the green waters, hundreds of fathoms down and still sinking. Suddenly he was standing. Yeah, me too. I gotta read Python too. No. I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read it during study tomorrow. Suddenly he was standing on short, springy. Read that together. What do you mean? What do you mean? Alright, fine. Fine. I'll read that instead. Yeah, I'll read that instead. I'll read this tomorrow. Why do I have 4 viewers, bro? We'll read that together and then you can be my audiobook. Grr. So wait, should we read this? Should I read 1984 or should I read Heart of Darkness? Or the thing for Python. Just skim read it for Python, bro. No. Just skim read Python. Skim read Python. Bruh. Nah, you gotta skim read Python, bro. Nah. I'm gonna read this, bro. This is actually kind of hard to read, that's why. Alright, fine, whatever. I'll read. Oh yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I want to do. Because I'm getting viewers because of it. That's good. Yeah, that's fire. I'll do that. That's working smarter, not harder. Okay, let's see. All this seemed okay. So for my new viewers, currently on page 30, bottom paragraph. Oh no, yeah, bottom paragraph, page 30. Suddenly he was standing on short, springy turf on a summer evening when the slanting rays of the sun gilded the ground. The landscape that he was looking at recurred so often in his dreams that he was never fully certain whether or not he had seen it in the real world. In his waking thoughts, he called it the Golden Country. It was an old, rabbit-bitten pasture with a foot track wandering across it and a mole-hole here and there. In the ragged hedge on the opposite side of the field, the boughs of the elm trees were swaying very faintly in the breeze, their leaves just stirring in dense masses like woman's hair. Somewhere near at hand, through out of sight, there was a clear, slow-moving stream where dace were swimming in the pools under the willow trees. Bro, this is some kind of dystopia, bro. I mean, not dystopia, utopia. The girl with dark hair was coming towards him across the field. With what seemed a single movement, she tore off her clothes and flung them disdainfully aside. Her body was white and smooth, but it aroused no desire in him. Indeed, he barely looked at it. What overwhelmed him in that instant was admiration for the gesture with which she had thrown her clothes aside. With its grace and carelessness, it seemed to annihilate a whole culture, a whole system of thought, as though Big Brother and the party and the thought police could all be swept into nothingness by a single splendid movement of the arm. That, too, was a gesture belonging to the ancient time. Winston woke up with the word Shakespeare on his lips. What is bro talking about? What? Bro's tripping. The telescreen was giving forth an ear-splitting whistle, which continued on the same note for 30 seconds. It was not 7:15. Getting up time for office workers. Winston wrenched his body out of bed naked, for a member of the outer party received only 3,000 clothing coupons annually, and a suit of pajamas was 600, and seized a dingy singlet and a pair of shorts that were lying across a chair. The physical jerks would begin in 3 minutes. The next moment, he was doubled up by a violent coughing fit which nearly always attacked him soon after waking up. It emptied his lungs so completely that he could only begin breathing again by lying on his back and taking a series of deep gasps. His veins had swelled with the effort of the cough, and the varicose ulcer had started itching. Yo, this guy is not okay, bro. 30 to 40 group. Yapped. A piercing female voice. 30 to 40 group. Take your places, please. 30s to 40s. Winston sprang to attention in front of the telescreen, upon which the image of a youngish woman, scrawny but muscular, dressed in tunic and gym shoes, had already appeared. Arms bending and stretching, she rapped out, "Take your time, by me. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Come on, comrades, put a bit of life into it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The pain of the coughing fit had not been quite driven out of Winston's mind the impression made by his dream, and the rhythmic movements of the exercise restored it somewhat. As he mechanically shot his arms back and forth, wearing on his face the look of a grim enjoyment, which was considered proper during the physical jerks, he was struggling to think his way backward into a dim period of his early childhood. It was extraordinarily difficult. Beyond the late 50s, everything faded. When there was no external records that you could refer to, even the outline of your own life lost its sharpness. You remembered huge events which had quite probably not happened. You remembered the details of incidents without being able to recapture their atmosphere, and there was long blank periods to which you could assign nothing. Everything had been different then. Even the names of countries and their shapes on the map had been different. Airstrip 1, for instance, had not been so called in those days. It had been called England or Britain, though London, he felt fairly certain, had always been called London. This is interesting. Winston could not definitely remember a time when his country had not been at war, but it was evident that there had been a fairly long interval of peace during his childhood, because one of his early memories was of an air raid which appeared to take everyone by surprise. Perhaps it was the time when the atomic bomb had fallen on Colchester. He did not remember the raid itself, but he did remember his father's hand clutching his own as they hurried down into some place deep in the earth, round and round a spiral staircase which rang under his feet, and which finally so wearied his legs that he had been whimpering and they had to stop and rest. His mother, in her slow, dreamy way, which was following a long way behind him. She was carrying his baby sister, or perhaps it was only a bundle of blankets that she was carrying. He was not certain whether his sister had been born then. Finally, they had emerged into a noisy, crowded place, which he had realized to be a tube station. We'll take a little mini break. Currently on page 33. Alright, break time's over. Alright, page 33. Top paragraph. There were people sitting all over the stone-flagged floor, and other people packed tightly together were sitting on metal bunks, one above the other. Winston and his mother and father found themselves a place on the floor, and near them an old man and an old woman were sitting side by side on a bunk. The old man had on a decent dark suit and a black cloth cap pushed back from very white hair. His face was scarlet, and his eyes were blue and full of tears. He reeked of gin. It seemed to breathe out of his skin in place of sweat, and one could have fancied that the tears welling from his eyes were of pure gin. That's crazy. But though slightly drunk, he was also suffering under some grief that was genuine and unbearable. In his childish way, Winston grasped that some terrible thing, something that was beyond forgiveness and could never be remedied, had just happened. It also seemed to him that he knew what it was. Someone whom the old man loved, a little granddaughter perhaps, had been killed. Every few minutes the old man kept repeating, "We didn't ought to have trusted him. I said so, Ma, didn't I? That's what comes of trusting him. I said so all along. We didn't ought to have trusted the buggers." But which buggers they didn't ought to have trusted, Winston could not now remember. What is going on, bro? They're kind of weird, bro. Oh, my lord. Since about the time, war had been literally continuous. Though strictly speaking, it had not always been the same war. For several months during his childhood, there had been confused street fighting in London itself, some of which he remembered vividly. But to trace out the history of the whole period, to say who was fighting whom at any given moment, would be an would have been utterly impossible, since no written record or no spoken word ever made mention of any other alignment than the existing one. At this moment, for example, in 1984, if it was 1984, Oceania was at war with Eurasia and in alliance with East Asia. Bro, what is this? Europe and China versus India? What in the world? Like Russia? What is going on here, bro? Like, huh? In no public or private utterance was it ever admitted that the three powers had at any time been grouped along different lines. Actually, as Winston well knew, it was only 4 years since Oceania had been warred with East Asia and in alliance with Eurasia, but that was merely a piece of furtive knowledge that which he happened to possess because his memory was not satisfactorily under control. Okay. Officially, the change of partners had never happened. Oceania was at war with Eurasia. Therefore, Oceania had always been at war with Eurasia. The enemy of the moment always represented absolute evil. And it followed that any past or future agreement with him was impossible. The frightening thing he reflected for the 10,000th time as he forced his soldiers painfully backwards, with hands on hips. They were gyrating their bodies from the waist, an exercise that was supposed to be good for back muscles. Okay, so some random exercise. The frightening thing was that it might all be true. If the party could thrust its hand into the past and say of this or that event it never happened, that surely was more terrifying than mere torture and death. Okay, bro, this guy cares way too much about history. The party said that Oceania had never been in alliance with Eurasia. He, Winston Smith, knew that Oceania had been in alliance with Eurasia as short a time as 4 years ago. But where did that knowledge exist? Only his own consciousness, which in any case must be soon annihilated. And if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Who controls the past? Ran the party slogan. Controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. What in the world, bro? Yeah, this is a massive conspiracy theory right here. Oh, my knee. Alright, let's see. The party said that Oceania had never been in alliance with Eurasia. Okay, we already read this part. And yet the past, though of its nature alterable, had never had been altered. Whatever was true now was true from everlasting to everlasting. It was quite simple. All that was needed was an unending series of victories over your own memory. Reality control, they called it in Newspeak. Doublethink. We're on page 35, bro. Just 6 more pages. Holy Lord, this is actually such a tough read. Stand easy, barked the instructress, a little more genially. Winston sank his arms to his sides and slowly refilled his lungs with air. His mind slid away into the labyrinthine world of doublethink. To know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously two opinions which cancelled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while laying claim to it, to believe that democracy was impossible and that the party was the guardian of democracy, to forget whatever it was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again, and above all to apply the same process of the process itself. That was the ultimate subtlety, consciously to induce unconsciousness, and then once again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis you had just performed. Now that whole thing was one sentence. That is insane. That is insane, bro. That is insane, bro. Even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink. The instructress, so basically utter nonsense. Utter nonsense. Nice. The instructress had called them to attention again. And now let's see which of us can touch her toes, she said enthusiastically, right over from the hip. Please, comrades. 1, 2, 1, 2. Winston loathed this exercise, which sent shooting pains all the way from his heels to his buttocks, and often ended by bringing on another coughing fit, though this guy is not okay. The half pleasant quality went out of his meditations. The past, he reflected, had not merely been altered, it had been actually destroyed. For how could you establish even the most obvious fact when there existed no record outside of your own memory? He tried to remember in what year he had first mention of Big Brother. He thought it must have been sometime in the 60s, but it was impossible to be certain. Yo, this is low-key hard stuff, bro. Like, I have no clue how to answer these questions. I've been reading this. Oh, what is this bull crap, bro? Yeah, I'm gonna have to go to Spark Notes and stuff. Oh well. Oh yeah, where was I? I was in the second to last. No. I'm on the top of page 36. Brother, he thought it must have been sometime in the 60s, but it was impossible to be certain. The party histories, of course, Big Brother figured as the leader and guardian of the revolution since its very earliest days. His exploits had been gradually pushed backwards in time until already they extended into the fabulous world of the 40s and the 30s, where the capitalists in their strange cylindrical hats still rode through the streets of London in great gleaming motor cars or horse carriages with glass slides. There was no knowing how much of this legend was true and how much invented. Winston could not even remember at what date the party itself had come into existence. He did not believe he had ever heard the word inksock before 1960, but it was possible that in its old Speak form, English socialism, that is to say, it had been current earlier. Everything melted into mist. Sometimes, indeed, you could put your finger on a definite lie. It was not true, for example, as was claimed in the party history books, that the party had invented airplanes. He remembered airplanes since his earliest childhood, but you could prove nothing. There was never any evidence. Just once in his whole life he had held in his hands unmistakably documentary proof of the falsification of a historical fact. And on that occasion, Smith screamed the shrewish voice from the telescreen. Oh, there it is. 6070 Smith W. Yes, you. Bend lower, please. You can do better than that. You're not trying. Lower, please. That's better, comrade. Now stand at ease, the whole squad, and watch me. A sudden hot sweat had broken... What's up, bro? A sudden hot sweat had broken all over Winston's body. His face remained completely inscrutable. Never showed dismay, never showed resentment. A single flicker of the eyes could give you away. He stood watching while the instructress raised her arms above her head and, one could not say gracefully, but with remarkable neatness and efficiency, bent over and tucked the first joint of her fingers under her toes. There, comrades, that's how I want to see you do it. Watch me again. I'm 39 and I've had 4 children. Now look. She bent over again. You see, my knees aren't bent. You can all do it if you want to, she added as she straightened herself up. Anyone under 45 is perfectly capable of touching his toes. We don't all have the privilege of fighting in the front line, but at least we can all keep fit. Remember our boys on the Malabar front, and the sailors in the floating fortresses. Just think what they have to put up with. Now try again. That's better, comrade. That's much better, she added encouragingly as Winston, with a violent lunge, succeeded in touching his toes with knees unbent for the first time in several years. Cinematic, absolute cinema. Absolute cinema. I am now in chapter 4, and I am 4 pages away from finishing reading. We can do this, boys. I'm going to take a little break. Not bad. Could be better. It's pretty good. I guess this is the advantage of crutches. Oh yeah. I do absolutely nothing at home except mess with crutches, because my foot is cooked. Not bad. Alright, time to go back to work. Not bad. Ah, thank you. I appreciate you. Garbe. I appreciate you. Nah, it's cause of crutches. Alright. Top page number 37, chapter 4. Let's begin. With the deep, unconscious sigh, which not even the nearness of the telescreen could prevent him from uttering when his day's work started, Winston pulled the speak right toward him, blew the dust from its mouthpiece, and put on his spectacles. Then he unrolled and clipped together 4 small cylinders of paper, which had already flopped out of the pneumatic tube on the right-hand side of his desk. In the walls of the cubicle there were 3 orifices. To the right of the speakwrite, a small pneumatic tube for written messages. To the left, a larger one for newspapers. And in the side wall, within easy reach of Winston's arm, a large oblong slit protected by a wire grating. This last was for the disposal of waste paper. Similar slits existed in thousands or tens of thousands throughout the building. Not only in every room, but at short intervals in every corridor. For some reason, there were nicknamed memory holes. Interesting. What is this? Memory holes. When one knew that any document was due for destruction, or even when one saw a scrap of waste paper lying about, it was an automatic action to lift the flap of the nearest memory hole and drop it in, whereupon it would be whirled away on a current of warm air to the enormous furnaces which were hidden somewhere in the recesses of the building. Winston examined the 4 slips of paper which he had unrolled. Each contained a message of only 1 or 2 lines, in the abbreviated jargon not actually newspeak, but consisting largely of newspeak words, which was used in the ministry for internal purposes. Okay, let's see. Okay. Times 17.3.84 BB speech mal reported Africa's rectify. What in the world? Times 19.1283.83 forecasts 3 YP fourth quarter 83 misprints verify current issue. Times 14.2.84 manipulantly malquoted chocolate rectify. Times 3.12.83 reporting BB day order double plus sung good refs unpersons rewrite full wise upsub antifilling. What in the world? Alright. With a faint feeling of satisfaction, Winston laid the 4th message aside. It was an intricate and reasonable job, and he had been better to be dealt with last. The other 3 were routine matters, though the second one would would probably mean some tedious wading through lists of fingers. Winston dialed back numbers on the telescreen and called for the appropriate issues of the Times, which slid out of the pneumatic tube after only a few minutes' delay. The messages he had received referred to articles or news items which, for one reason or another, it was thought necessary to alter, or, as the official phrase had it, to rectify. For example, it appeared from the Times of the 17th of March that Big Brother, in his speech at the previous day, had predicted that the South Indian front would remain quiet, but that a Eurasian offensive would shortly be launched in North Africa. As it happened, the Eurasian Higher Command had launched its offensive in South India and left North Africa alone. It was therefore necessary to rewrite a paragraph of Big Brother's speech in such a way to make him predict the thing that had actually happened. So this guy's just trying to scam everyone. I'm so close to finishing. Oregon, the Times of the 19th of December had published the official forecasts of the output of the various classes of consumption goods in the fourth quarter of 1983, which was also the sixth quarter of the ninth three-year plan. Today's issue contained a statement of the actual output, from which it appeared that the forecasts were in every instance grossly wrong. Winston's job was to rectify the original figures by making them agree with the later ones. As for the third message, it referred to a very simple error which could be set right in a couple of minutes. As short of a time ago as February, the Ministry of Plenty had issued a promise, a categorical pledge were the official words, and there would be no reduction of the chocolate ration during 1984. Actually, as Winston was aware, the chocolate ration was to be reduced from 30 grams to 20 grams at the end of the present week. All that was needed to substitute for the original promise a warning that it would probably be necessary to reduce the ration at some time in April. So this guy trying to do propaganda. As soon as Winston had dealt with each of the messages, he clipped his speak-written corrections to the appropriate copy of the Times and pushed them into the pneumatic tube. Then, with a movement which was as nearly as impossible unconscious, he crumpled up the original message and any notes that he himself had made, and dropped them into the memory hole to be devoured by the flames. Interesting. What happened in the unseen labyrinth to which the pneumatic tubes led, he did not know in detail, but he did know in general terms. As soon as all the corrections which happened to be necessary in any particular number of the Times had been assembled and collated, that number would be reprinted, the original copy destroyed, and the corrected copy placed on the files on its stead. This process of continuous alterations was not only applied to newspapers, but to books, periodicals, pamphlets, posters, leaflets, films, soundtracks, cartoons, photographs, to every kind of literature or documentation which might conceivably hold any political or ideological significance. So pretty much, this is propaganda. This is fascism. We do not like fascism. Alright, let's see. Day by day and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. In this way, every prediction made by the party could be shown by documentary evidence to have been correct. Nor was any item of news or any expression of opinion which conflicted with the needs of the moment ever allowed to remain on record. All history was a palimpsest. Alright, bro. Alright. We're on page 40 right now. We're one page away from the ending. Alright, where was I? All history was a palimpsest. Scraped, clean, and reinscribed exactly as often as was necessary. In no case would it have been possible, once the deed was gone, to prove that any falsification had taken place. The largest section of the records department, far larger than the one in which Winston worked, consisted simply of persons whose duty it was to track down and collect all copies of books, newspapers, and other documents which had been superseded and were due for destruction. A number of the times, which might, because of changes in political alignment or mistaken prophecies uttered by Big Brother, okay, have been rewritten a dozen times, still stood on the files, bearing its original date, and no other copy existed to contradict it. Books also were recalled and were rewritten again and again, and were invariably reissued without any admission that any alteration had been made. Even the written instructions which Winston received and which he invariably got rid of as soon as he had dealt with them, never stated or implied that any act of forgery was to be committed. Always the reference was to slips, errors, misprints, or misquotations which it was necessary to put right in the interest of accuracy. But actually, he thought, as he readjusted the Ministry of Plenty's figures, it was not even forgery. It was merely the substitution of one piece of nonsense for another. This guy hates the current system. Most of the material that you were dealing with had no connection with anything in the real world, not even the kind of connection that is contained in a direct lie. Statistics were just as much as a fantasy in the original version as in the recited version. Yo, you shut up, bro. If you're complaining, bro, get out of the stream. All right? For example, okay, what was that? A great deal of the time, you were expected to make them up out of your head. For example, the Ministry of Plenty's forecast had estimated the output of boots for the quarter at 145 million pairs. The actual output was given as 62 millions. Winston, however, in rewriting the Ford's forecast, marked the figure down to 57 millions, so as to allow it for the usual claim that the quota had been overfilled. In any case, 62 millions was no nearer to the truth than 57 millions, or than 145 millions. Very likely no buttes had been produced at all. Likelier still, nobody knew how many had been produced, much less cared. All one knew was that every quarter astronomical numbers of boots were produced on paper, while perhaps half the population of Oceania went barefoot. And so it was that with every class of recorded fact, great or small, everything faded away into a shadow world in which, finally, even the date of the year had become inserted. Winston glanced across the hall. In the corresponding cubicle on the other side, a small, precise-looking, dark-chinned man named Tillotson was working steadily away, with a folded newspaper on his knee and his mouth very close to the mouthpiece of the speakwrite. He had the air of trying to keep what he was saying a secret between himself and the telescreen. He looked up, and his spectacles darted a hostile flash in Winston's direction. Okay, that is the end of this. All right. Now, do you want me to read the book for Python? I'm waiting. All right, I'm starting. I'll read it. Where'd it go? Okay, I do your math. Yeah, I take a break. Girl decoded. That's next. It is currently 10:30 p.m. I'll read the Spark Notes for George Orwell's thing tomorrow during study, and I'll annotate the book during study tomorrow. I'm gonna go pee. I'll be back. Is God ready? Garvey. Garvey. Alright, hold on. Alright, give me a second. Hey, God.
Hey, help me. I have two questions left. Ready? So you have
The answer is B.
you have
The
AFT.
answer is B.
B?
Yeah.
Okay. And then what's this?
It's E.
E?
Yeah.
After show work?
You should show a little bit, just like write random gibberish, and I think you'll be good.
Okay.
Yeah, friggin' Rana, friggin' Rana. This was a good idea, this stream.
Yeah, I was so confused because I got a notification. It's like exotic started streaming or something, and it's like reading 20 through 41 of 1984. I was like, what?
Alright. Alright, we shall begin reading this. I'm starting.
Okay, yeah.
Alright, I will now begin. Alright, chat. We're currently on chapter 9 of this book. It's called Girl Decoded. Take a look. Girl Decoded. It's created by this lady called Rana. I don't like this lady. I don't. For personal reasons and for her literally reasons.
Okay, wait, I'm gonna watch the
Yeah. Goodbye, bro. Goodbye. And now we shall begin. I am looking for chapter 9. I found 8. Alright, chapter 9. The challenge. It's called the challenge. Let us begin. Alright. I'm gonna make my thing big. Alright. Let's start. Chapter 9. The challenge. Baron Cohen offered a novel approach to autism that altered how I viewed the world and my work. For the most part, up until his research, autism was perceived in a very binary way. Either you were autistic, which meant you had a neurological condition, or you weren't. But Baron Cohen theorized that autism wasn't an all or nothing proposition. Rather, human beings fell somewhere along a spectrum. Yup. Yeah, we know. You're on the spectrum, little bro. Alright. At one end of the spectrum are the empathizers, those with the ability to identify other emotions and thoughts, and to respond to these with an appropriate emotion. The empathizer intuitively figures out how people are feeling and how to treat people with care and sensitivity. At the other end of the spectrum are the systemizers, those who are driven to analyze and explore a system, to extract underlying rules that govern the behavior of a system, and the drive to construct systems. That's kind of goofy. Empathizers excel in human-to-human interaction, but they might not be as adept as technical skills such as engineering or math. In contrast, systemizers tend to be great at technology, numbers, and logic, but many fall short on their people skills. Yeah, no, this sounds like me. Based on Baron Cohen's theory, autism would be at... Wait, what was I? Based on Baron Cohen's theory, autism would be at the extreme end of the systemizer end of the spectrum, lacking in social skills. Most of us fall somewhere in between those two extremes. Even if someone isn't diagnosed with autism, they might still have autistic tendencies. That is, they may have a lower EQ than somebody who skews closer to the empathizers end of the spectrum, while still being able to function fully in society. Likewise, someone who is good at math may still have good social skills, which might even move them even more toward the middle of the spectrum. So if you're smart, you're autistic. That's basically what she's saying. She's stupid. Based on his research, Baron Cohen found that men tend to fall more towards the systemizer end of the spectrum, while women fall more toward the empathizer end. That makes sense. Given that, it is not surprising that more boys are diagnosed with autism than boys. Depending on which statistics you believe, the ratio is either 2 to 1, 3 to 1, or or as high as 4 to 1. I can't, bro. I can't read this woman. What I found most compelling about Baron Cohen's theory is that where an individual lens in the spectrum is not static. For example, an empathizer who has experienced a great deal of stress may not be as attentive as the people with whom she is interacting. Under those circumstances, she could be shifting towards the systemizer, and if the systemizer falls head over heels in love, she may work hard enough at being responsive at the needs of the partner, and find herself shifting more toward the empathizer end of the spectrum. I was really struck by this concept of a fluid spectrum, and Baron Cohen said that with a bit of support, one could train systemizers to move up the empathy scale, and vice versa. Oh my god, bruh. Working with Baron Cohen opened my eyes to the true potential of emotion AI. We may all be created equal, but we are not equally good or consistently good at everything. Some people are born with high EQ, others, including those diagnosed with autism, struggle with EQ, and the vast majority of us fall somewhere in between. Cultural differences or biases and ethnic stereotypes can also cloud our perception and judgment. Some people, due to medical conditions like stroke, brain injury, impaired hearing, and vision loss, lose the ability to process emotion. There are times when we all may experience the disorienting feeling that we're speaking to a wall, or that we are out of our depth in dealing with an emotional situation or person. At some point in our lives, many of us could use an emotional prosthetic to help us maneuver through a difficult time and get a better handle on our emotions and the emotions of others. I believe that technology can augment human potential, just as people use canes and wear glasses or use hearing aids to help them walk, see, or hear. An emotion prosthetic can help boost our empathy skills. Such a tool doesn't take away from our other strengths, but adds to our innate abilities. I spent so much time working with Baron Cohen's group and attending psychological department lectures that Peter Robinson thought I had gone AWOL. One day he pulled me aside, exasperated. Rana, you're distracting yourself by going on into all these things. Just focus on what you need to build. Pushing back against my advisor was not easy for me, given how I had been raised, but I stuck to my guns. Bro, what is she talking about, bro? I knew that what I was working out wasn't simply an engineering problem. I had to study how humans process emotion before I could build a machine that could. By nature, Peter is a skeptic, someone who has seen and heard it all, and has gone impervious to the over-the-tone hype of inventors and entrepreneurs promoting the next big thing. It's not that he isn't open to new concepts or off-the-wall ideas like mine. What I've come to learn about Peter is that he doesn't believe something is real until he can see it for himself. When Peter challenged me, I thought he doesn't think I can do it. I was used to being the golden girl, showered with praise and honors. Now I wasn't in a place where I had to prove myself. That said, I wouldn't be as successful as I am today without his constant prodding. What made him such a good mentor was his ability to strike just the right level of involvement. He was there when I needed him, but he wasn't overbearing. He encouraged me to take ownership of my work. But by my second year at Cambridge, Peter and I had grown closer, and his unrelenting support altered my destiny. He made it clear that if this software was going to be useful in the real world, it had to work in the real world. That meant that the algorithm had to perform outside the lab under real-world conditions, where the environment, like lighting, was often out of my control. This made the task more difficult, but it made me a better scientist. Training an algorithm. Training an algorithm is a lot like training a dog. Both tasks require endless patience, repetition, and positive reinforcement. Suppose, for example, that you're trying to train a dog to play fetch, a simple enough game. Few dogs would intuitively know that when you throw a ball, you expect them to retrieve it and return it to you. You first have to train a dog to perform this function, and the most effective way to accomplish this is break the big goal down into smaller tasks. First, you show the dog and the ball or object to be retrieved. Next, you throw the ball and run after it with the dog. And then, when you catch up with it, you put the ball in the dog's mouth, and then pat him on the head, tell him "good dog," and give him a treat. And then you do this again. Eventually, your dog puts it all together, and when you throw the ball, it dutifully retrieves it. Similarly, if you're training a math algorithm, you don't overload it with a lot of instructions at one time. As with training a dog, you start small and keep layering on different levels of difficulty. An algorithm is a set of instructions essentially telling the computer to do this. In my case, the goal was to train my algorithm not only to recognize faces and discern features, but to identify facial expressions and infer meaning. That task required a number of interim steps. The computer had to first see the face, identify the features, analyze the expression, and then make judgment call based on probability. This is one approach to AI building called machine learning. Wow. Each step was difficult and time-consuming. For example, I first had to teach the algorithm to find a smile. To do that, I had to feed it lots and lots of smiles from the database and then quiz the program to see if it learned the lesson. And as the algorithm mastered each step, it too would get a reward. There are actual reward functions built into the algorithm that give it brownie points for getting the right answer and deduct points if it gets it wrong. Think of it as a good algorithm, bad algorithm. The algorithm strives to accrue as many brownie points as possible. Oh my god, bruh. Now here's where the jargon can be a bit misleading. When I talk about feeling an image to an algorithm, I'm not showing it an image that a human would recognize as an image, like a face. Rather, I'm communicating with my algorithm in a language that it understands, breaking the image down into pixels and assigning numerical values to each pixel. The number of pixels depend on the image's resolution, but let's assume that there are 96 pixels packed into 1 inch. If that pixel is black, it would be given a value of 0. If that pixel is white, it would be given a value of 255. So this is basically, we know what this is. But if the area being graded is in between grayish, it would get a value between, let's say, 125, depending on the shade of gray. So you end up with a list of matrix of numerical values. And that is what an algorithm ingests as input. It breaks down. What's up, Adrian? I'm helping my friends reading, bro. I'm helping my friends reading. Oh my god, this is absolute cinema. I Well, the algorithm is just as an input. It breaks down a smile, saying to basic confidence, pixel by pixel, number by number, the contour of the mouth, the lift of the lips. Bro, you got a problem with that? You got a problem with my Sonic toys, bro? Nah, bro. Nah. This right here is Shadow the Hedgehog. Absolute fire, bro. Don't complain. I have posters in my room too. Bunch of posters. Alright. Ah. Welcome to the stream, Adrian. I got lotion too. Alright. I'm just kidding, bro. Chill. Alright, I'm moving to page 105. This is kind of BS. This is where machine learning kicks in. After a while, through life experience, a worldly algorithm can look at an unfamiliar face and make an assessment. That's a smile. It can also determine if the smile is wholehearted. Yeah, I know that. Wholehearted or weak, and give the weak smile a lower rating than a big, authentic grin. This produces a massive amount of code, hundreds and thousands of letters, and a number on pages. It can therefore be very unwieldy. But code can be organized into a more manageable form. Blocks of code can be linked into specific sections. Think of it as a book divided into chapters, pages, and even paragraphs. It's an extremely labor-intensive, difficult task to produce the kind of algorithm I need. But there are no shortcuts. There is an expression in the AI world: data is king. That's because you need volumes of data and the right kind of data to create smart algorithms. Alright, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Okay, chapter 9 is done. Alright, chapter 9. I'm not reading any more of this. I'm gonna now write the summary, and like you can copy me, I guess. But like, don't copy word for word, you know? Alright, 400. Matt chill. Chapter 9 done. I'm now gonna freaking hop on. Hold up. So I'm gonna do this. Oh. So I'm gonna click this. Alright, so we have this. So now I'm gonna go to here, and I'm gonna be like, chapter 9. She knows the autist. She knows what it means to be autistic. Great job. She knows what machine learning is. Great job. Chapter 9 summary. She explains the science behind autism and talks about how she is incorporating machine learning into her program Emotion AI, which helps detect people's emotions. She starts off by explaining how AI takes pixels in a pic and assigns it a number, and then she talks about the whole process of quizzing the AI until it knows what it's like, what an actual smile is. Great job. Alright. I'm back here, and I will now continue reading. I've been shooting for an hour, 10 minutes, bro. Chapter 11. Chapter 10, I mean. Mommy brain. That's what chapter 11 is called. What in the world? Okay, chapter 10. Learning human. In Egypt, once you are married, your parents and in-laws start bombarding you with, okay, when will you make me a grandparent question. So it was not entirely unexpected when the day after our wedding, marriage started bartering Will and me about having children. We both loved children and we knew that we wanted them, but we agreed that a sensible course of action would be to hold off on starting a family until I had completed my PhD. To be honest, I was hardly an expert in birth control. Hey, yo. The kinds of article on sex and birth control in every popular women's magazine in the States are not considered appropriate in Muslim society. On top of that, I had an aversion to taking pills of any kind, so I refused to take the pill, the simplest and most effective form of birth control. I didn't know much about the other methods of contraception, so Whale and I started on the age-old method of birth control, the rhythm method. What does that even mean? Huh? I'm reading. Okay. Things went as planned for the first year of my PhD, but during summer break, before starting my second year at Cambridge, I guess my math got a bit fuzzy. Then in early October, I was sitting in the bus headed for the computer lab when I was so overcome by nausea that I had to drag myself up to the front of and beg the driver to let me out. The following day, I woke up to waves of nausea and decided to go to my GP. By this point, alright, bro. By this point, I had begun to suspect the truth. That blood tests performed at the doctor's discovered that I was pregnant. I was in a state of denial but facing a surge of conflicting emotions. I love kids and I was excited at the prospect of holding a baby in my arms, but I was also terrified that Peter would say, "Sorry, Rana, you need to take a leave from school," and that Whale would insist that I come home. Bro, wait. How did she... Wait, what? Bro, how did she get pregnant, bro? What in the world, bro? Okay. And that had serious long-term consequences for my career path. Without a PhD from a prestigious school, I had a little chance of securing a tenure track position at AUC. I had no plan B. In the days I returned to my apartment and told Will the news. He too was happy at the prospect of being father, but he understood my dilemma. He didn't issue any edicts, but he urged me to tell Peter right away so we could plan for the future one way or another. So without skipping a beat, I went back to the lab and knocked on Peter's door. When I walked in, I burst into tears. When he discovered the reason of my tears, he smiled broadly and said, "Rana, that's wonderful news." And he quickly followed up by promising that he would support me in whatever I decided to do. If I wanted to continue with the program, he would be there for me, and if I wanted to take a leave, he would understand. I went back to my apartment and spoke to Whale again before I made up my mind. "Rana, if you take leave now, you will never complete this PhD," he told me. With Will's support, I remained at Cambridge, but now without some misgivings. I was consumed with self-doubt. Will I be a good mom or too distracted by my work? Will I be able to finish my PhD with the baby to take care of? How can I survive that year without my full support system, my husband, my family, and my friends? There was a big question about whether I could pull this off, which made me all the more driven to make it work. I was thrown off of balance for a week or two after learning that I was pregnant and quickly regained my footing. I took charge. I was going to do this my way. I decided that I wanted natural childbirth with as little medical intervention as possible. I opted to work with Sally Lomas, a highly trained midwife who was affiliated with an excellent hospital in Cambridge, where I would deliver the baby. To me, it was the best of both worlds. A doctor who would be on hand if something went awry, but the midwife and I got along with selected family members would manage the delivery. Will was fine with this. I took a yoga class for expectant mothers and signed up for LeMay's childbirth preparation classes, where I learned breathing techniques to relieve the pain. Demon Slayer. Breathing, fourth form. Without the presence of my husband or family, I was grateful to have Sally and the other expectant mothers I met in these classes for support. In Cambridge, my decision to use a midwife instead of a doctor was well within the norm, even trendy. Many women like me were fully determined to find an alternative approach to what we saw as medicalization of childbirth. It was common to have birthing balls, scented candles, and even husbands, family, friends in the delivery room. This was not the case in the Middle East. When I called my parents and told them my plan, my dad was absolutely horrified. In fact, he couldn't believe that in a modern country like England that was even allowed. In Egypt, only the poorest used midwives, who has no formal training in childbirth. It was dangerous, and the mortality rate among these women were quite high. The fact that a woman in my position who had access to real doctors would choose a midwife was inconceivable to him. Eventually, he calmed down when I described Sally's education and that the fact that I was delivering in the Rosie, the best hospital in Cambridge. But neither my parents nor my in-laws would wrap their brains around the fact that Whale would be in the delivery room, assisting with the birth. Oh, naughty boy. There's the prohibition in Islam against this. The opposition is cultural. Perhaps a form of belief, somehow, that men shouldn't see women in the state. Or more likely, men just can't take it. Despite the yoga and the breathing, I did not have any easy pregnancy. Nausea never really went away. I would be at the lab and then excuse myself from whatever meeting I was in to rush to the restroom, where I'd throw up, wash my face, brush my teeth, and then walk back into the meeting. I sometimes surprised myself at how determined I was, but underneath the bravado, I was intensely lonely. Sometimes late at night, I'd break down and cry. It all felt so hard, and I wasn't sure where I would keep going. Alright, I'm gonna type she pregnant, but she will use a midwife. Midwife. Don't know what that means. How did she even get pregnant, bro? What question? I've tried reading this. Alright, bet. Take care of this. I could just BS this. Figure out what the problem is. Create a plan to fix the problem in small increments. Thank you, Garv. Nice. All right. Page 110, lab mates. At Cambridge, I was able to work with some of the top computer scientists in the world, especially in cutting-edge artificial intelligence like computer vision and machine learning. It made me a better scientist. In retrospect, though, I see that some of the most valuable lessons I learned at Cambridge were not necessarily in the realm of computer science. They were about human beings, and I think that they made me into a more informed, better person. There were few educational or work opportunities in the Middle East for people with physical or mental disabilities. Skill issue. Expectations for their success in life were low. I was therefore surprised, actually completely gobsmacked, who uses that, to find myself sharing an office with a partially sighted young British man named Silas Brown. What a corny name. Silas had a condition called cortical visual impairment. His eyes worked fine, but there was a glitch in the optical processing system in his brain that resulted in very poor sight. Still, he moved quickly around the lab and campus with the aid of a white cane. Clearly, Silas had done well in life despite his limited vision. I was impressed with his ability to brush aside his visual deficit and forge ahead. He never complained and seemed to take his condition in stride, but he did confess to me that he often felt uncomfortable carrying on conversations with others, not because he wasn't well-spoken or socially awkward, but because his limited vision prevented him from seeing the other person's facial expressions. He was often in the dark as to whether the person he was chatting to was interested or engaged. It made it difficult to respond in an appropriate way. I empathized with this problem. My research on autism and had opened my eyes to the obstacles facing people who were, for whatever reason, blind to nonverbal cues. Silas was Jehovah's Witness, the first I had ever met. Jehovah's Witness is a branch of Christianity that seems even stricter than Islam. Silas was forbidden from celebrating the most religious holidays, nor did he celebrate his own birthday. Similar to Muslims, Jehovah's Witnesses must adhere to a strict code of conduct regarding instructions. Bro, I don't care about Jehovah's Witness. In the fall of '02, around the same time I learned that I was pregnant, Tal Sobel Schickler, an Israeli PhD student, joined the lab. There has been some bad blood between our two countries, and both Israelis and Egyptians still have vivid memories of the 1973 war. Tal learned that there was an Egyptian student in the PhD program and sensitive to this, and unbeknownst to me, wrote to Peter and said that she didn't want to apply if he thought it would cause conflict. I don't think I struck Tal as a woman looking for I don't think I struck Tal as a woman looking for a fight, and we quickly became good friends. Tal was married with 2 small children. Her husband was also studying at Cambridge. She wasn't on her own. I observed how she juggled her career, marriage, and parenting responsibilities, and I knew that by the time this would be me. Like me, she was ambitious, and despite having a family, she wanted to excel in her field. We had something else in common, a desire to humanize technology. Her thesis project and analysis of effective expression in speech was similar to mine, except that she was teaching computers how to decode verbal cues rather than facial ones. Oh, she found her partner. Nice. Oh my god, right. Fall turned into the cold, dark days of winter, and my algorithm still could not identify even one single facial expression. I felt intense pressure to prove myself. After all, I had only a year and a half left to finish this complicated thesis project. If things didn't start falling into place soon, I might not make it. I was starting my 7th month of pregnancy and tried to pack as much work into my days and nights as possible. I would wake up, wobble out of bed, take the bus to work, and had long given up biking, and be in the lab by 9 a.m. Then I'd work until about 4 p.m. or so, take the bus back home, shower, cobble together something to put on the microwave for dinner, and then plop into my beach couch with my laptop propped on my growing tummy, and code code away until late at night. Often I'd have the TV on in the background just to keep me company. When the world was taking me so long, it wasn't as if I were trying to teach the algorithm an entire repertoire of facial expressions. I was working on teaching it one basic expression, the head nod. I thought it was a good way to begin because a nod is more obvious movement than, say, an eyebrow raiser or lip curl. It's hard to miss the up and end motion of a nod. Still, from a machine learning perspective, teaching an algorithm to identify a nod was complicated because it involved moving parts. I couldn't use only a single frame as a static picture. My algorithm would have to learn the entire head movement from start to finish as it unfolded over time, and that held true for most nonverbal cues, even the simplest of expressions like a smile. A smile unfolds over time, and that temporal signature, the pace at which the expression unfolds, is very telling. Different nods have different meanings. The basic simple up and down nods, up and down movement of head signals consent to yes or awa in Arabic. The pace at which you so basically she's like freaking out about like nodding and stuff. Alright, cool. Next page. And even Egyptians is like ruda. The Egyptian joy will okay. Bro. Alright. Oh shoot, I'm streaming. I forgot. Okay, bro. Oh my god, Jenna. That means it's the birth of her little girl. Alright, Jenna. I continued my work and practically coded my way into the delivery room, working right up until a few days before my daughter Jenna was born. I felt my first labor pain in the late afternoon of May 23rd, 2003 at my final breathing class, with Will present. We went home until 11 p.m. Later, when the contractions were 8 minutes apart, we headed to the Rosie Hospital where we met Sally. My mother, my sister Rasha, and my mother-in-law had all come to Cambridge for the birth. My mother joined Will in the delivery room. The first thing that Sally did was slide the hospital bed to the wall so that I had room to move around. The only medical intervention was the monitor I wore around my waist to track the baby's heartbeat. Throughout the night, I bounced on the birthing ball. Okay. Paced around the room, did some yoga poses like the rocking cat on all fours, and breathed through the contractions with Whale as my coach. My mom sat in the corner chair and read and reread verses from the Quran. It was raining outside. The contractions came faster and stronger, each one more painful. I began to push. At 8:55 a.m. on May 24th, Jenna was born. Good job, bro. Sally placed her on my chest, still attached to me by the umbilical cord. She looked at me with her steel gray blue eyes, and I was overcome with relief and joy to be holding my little girl in my arms. I started to cry. I felt both gratitude and awe. I vowed to be the best mother I could be. As is the custom of Islam, the first thing a newborn should hear is the ikama, or the Muslim call to prayer. My mom, aware of this, leaned over, immediately following Jenna's birth, and whispered prayers softly into Jenna's ear. Allahu Akbar. I bear witness that there is no God but God. I bear witness that Muhammad is the prophet of God. Come to prayer, come to success. God is great. There is no God but God. Years later, I learned that it is customary for the newborn's dad or grandfather to whisper the prayer rather than a woman. But my mother is a devout Muslim, and it felt just right that the matriarch of the family is the one who introduced her granddaughter to her faith. Little did I know we were already breaking down gender roles. 10 days later, Whale, his mother, and my sister returned to Cairo. My mother stayed on to help out with Jenna for a few more weeks. I was back at the lab a week later, not because I felt pressured to return to work, but because I wanted to be there. The research was going well, and I wanted to maintain the momentum. I spent the time putting the finishing touches on a paper describing my work that a few days later I submitted to the International Conference on Intelligent User Interfaces, a major gathering of computer engineers. I didn't know whether the paper would be accepted or not, but I was determined to send it in before the deadline. In August, I took Jenna, now 3 months old, on her first flight back to Egypt to visit family. It was a 5-hour British Airways flight. I was breastfeeding her at the time, but I still wasn't comfortable doing so in public, which meant that I hesitated to feed her on the plane. And even though I had prepared bottles of pumped breast milk ahead of time, Jenna wouldn't drink from them. She must have sensed my anxiety because she screamed and cried the whole time. I did my best to comfort her. It was a traumatic flight for the two of us. The minute we set foot in Egypt, she calmed down. I was very happy to be with my family, and everyone fussed over her. She was completely spoiled, as was I. And after all that time taking care of myself, it was wonderful being cared for by others for a change. My friends organized a small celebration for us. The running joke was, how did you become pregnant in the first place? Over the internet? Everyone knew that Will and I hardly saw each other. All too quickly, it was September. I took a flight back to Cambridge with Jenna. It was time to spring back in action. What in the freak, yeah? Can you believe this? Look at what Lil Bro said. Look at what he said. He said, He said, "No offense, Anish. I left the stream and I already finished the book. I don't think he realizes the amount of effort I put in for you guys. Alright? Like, this, I'd have no reason to do this right now. But I'm doing this anyway for my friends. Alright? If you don't respect it, you gotta be quiet about it, alright? Just be quiet about it. Like, what are you doing, little bro? Like, I'm working my butt off here, and I'm struggling to read, and I'm like giving everybody answers and stuff, and this guy's freaking like, yeah, frick. I know Garv will be good. I know Garv was grateful for my efforts. Wailing around this. Rana is still locked in for her work. Alright, that's it. Alright, chapter 11. Mommy brain. How many pages left? 126. Holy hell, we have 10 pages left. This is crazy stuff. A law has been written by the so-called mommy brain. How after she gives birth, a woman's cognitive abilities decline for a time as she focuses on her baby. It's true that a woman's brain do undergo certain changes, especially in areas involving the so-called maternalistic, the region of the brain that control empathy and understanding. And I did feel a rush of new emotions, a deep and protective love for Jenna that I had never felt below for any other living thing. But having a baby did not throw me off from my game. In fact, the mommy brain was in high gear. Yes, I wanted to carve out as much time as Jenna as I could. My time with her was precious, but that didn't mean I was ready to give up my other dream. I just meant that I had to be even more efficient with my time. In a way, having a family in Cambridge made me even more motivated. I wasn't lonely anymore. My mother came often to help me out when she could, but I still had to put Jenna in daycare. I found a highly recommended daycare center a block from my apartment building. The staff was well trained and warm, and a number of the Cambridge faculty used it for the children. What I had anticipated a surge of guilt and experience when I dropped off my was distant. I feared that because she was so young, she would scarred for life and become an emotionally detached human being. She was quickly subsided in her love daycare and was a happy, responsive baby and lived a toddler. As it turned out, her experience in early care must seem to make her more adaptable and accepting of new people and changing her life. Jenna doesn't get thrown by new situations. She is confident and quick to adapt. Even with child care close by, juggling all of this wasn't easy. My day began at 4 a.m. I'd work on my thesis until Jenna got up around 6 or so. Then I'd feed her, would play a bit, and I'd drop her off at daycare. After that, I'd go back home and pick up my bicycle onto work, where I switched to right back to PhD mode. I stayed laser focused on work until around 4 p.m. when I'd pick up Jenna and then switch back to mommy mode. I'd take her for a stroll around the river camp or I'd read her a book, and when Jenna went to sleep, I'll switch back to work into work mode. Oh my god. Bro, she just constantly yaps. Okay. So basically she got accepted. This is basically what's happening. Her thing got. Okay. It's the first time I ever had resident such public response was overwhelmingly positive. Her sense to see that I was onto something. I felt respected and recognized by my tears. My work rocked, and that was what matters. I now had only 2 jobs: scientist, inventor, and mother of an infant, and I was not determined to fail at either. Okay. I worked extremely hard at a 30-year coverage. It was an incredibly productive time for me. Now that my algorithm could read human facial expressions, I was able to teach. Okay, so basically she succeeded. So that's what I want to say. Alright. Some random gibberish. I'm sure it'll work out. So, okay. When spring finally okay. The year passed quickly. In early June, as I was wrapping up my thesis and preparing to return to Cairo with Janelle for summer break, Peter Roberts circulated an email announcing that Rosalind Pickard, the professor who wrote Effective Computing, would be touring the lab on August 24th. Pickard wanted to meet with some students and learn about their projects. Peter anticipated that she would give each student about 10 minutes, and he urged anyone who was interested to sign up. I didn't realize at the time, but I had to make some difficult choices then. Choices that would ultimately impact both my personal and professional life. Of course, I wanted desperately to meet the woman who had inspired me to do the work, but whose book I admired, but there was a catch. Mine needed additional work before I felt comfortable showing to Pickard. Before I had learned of Pickard's visit, I had planned to going home for the summer and returning for the fall to finish my thesis, but now I was reconsidering that decision. It was a difficult choice. Will and I had barely seen each other over the past 3 years. Summer was a time for us to get reacquainted, and for Jenna to see her father and extended family. Little did I know that this trade-off between Rosalind Pickard and Myers would become, and my family would become the norm. I called Will and explained the situation to him. He agreed that I should stay. Bro, she's too. Great job, Garf. Alright, good night. That's fire. Good night.